Welcome. Good morning. Good morning. I am so honored to be with you today for the opening of the 15th International Dabrowski Congress. Is this too loud? It's okay. I can move away. Okay. So my name is Chris Wells, and I am a therapist and a writer, a consultant, and I'm the president of a new nonprofit organization called the Dabrowski Center. Thank you. So you may be wondering about the title of my keynote because I've changed it. You came here expecting me to talk about Dabrowski's legacy, the future of the theory of positive disintegration. And I am going to talk about those things. But as I was working on this talk, I realized that the thing that I wanted to talk most about was developing a relationship with my mentor, Michael Dabrowski. I wanted to celebrate his work and tell you more about him personally. And so that's how we're going to start. So Michael is from Poznań, Poland, and he was born in 1933. And he has talked with me quite a bit about his history in general, but there's so much about his life that I feel like has gotten kind of, well, not ignored because you haven't heard about it, but just hasn't been discussed. I mean, he has talked with me about what it was like to grow up in Poland during World War II. And one of the stories that kept coming into my mind when I thought about what to say about his childhood is that, do you know that when he started school, they were living in a part of Poland where, when it was occupied by the Nazis, they weren't allowed to speak Polish anymore. And so when he was in like first grade, suddenly he was in school where he had to speak German. But he didn't know German at that time. So if you messed up and spoke Polish, you would be punished. So his parents moved their boys. He has two brothers, or he had two brothers, one older and one younger. And his parents protected his children. Protected their children. And I remember the first time I read his book and I saw that he dedicated it to his parents who protected their sons from the Nazis and the communists. And I think it's important to understand that this is where Michael came from, that this is his history. And then these photos on this slide, on the one on the left, you see that he's with his parents and his older brother. And the slide on the right is a photo of Michael from 1955. And this was the 5th World Festival of Youth and Students in Warsaw. And this was a really special event, actually, in Poland at the time, because for the first time in many years, foreigners, outsiders, were able to come into Poland and mingle with Polish people. And so Michael made friends, of course, like he does. Michael has many friends. And so even back then, he was connecting with people. And he made friends with people from Belgium. And he was able to get an assistantship in Belgium after he finished his master's degree in plant physiology. And so in 1958, Michael left Poland and he went to Belgium first. And he knew that that was it, that he was leaving Poland and he wasn't going to live there again. So while he was in Belgium that year, he started reaching out and writing to professors in the United States because he wanted to come here and study and get his PhD. And it was a whole journey to even get here. He's talked last year, actually, or maybe it was in 2019, one time at UNASA, he talked with kids about his journey of leaving Poland and how difficult it was to get a visa and how tenuous it was, even up to the last moment to get here. But he did get here. In 1959, Michael came to Poland and started his doctorate program in molecular biology. And first he was at the University of Illinois, and that didn't work out. And so he transferred to the University of Wisconsin, where he was with a geneticist named Ernst Fries. And Then that man left Wisconsin and went to the National Institute of Health in Bethesda, and Michael followed him there. That didn't work out. And then he went back to the University of Wisconsin, and he ended up with Millard Sussman as his major advisor. And luckily that did work out, because that could have been the end of the story right there. And Michael would have had to return to Pullman because of his visa. But luckily he was able to get his PhD in molecular biology in 1965. He did a postdoc in Wisconsin. And then he had to leave the United States because of his visa. So he had to find some other English-speaking country to move to start his career. Well, yes, sorry. Oh, okay. Well, here you go, Zoom people. So after all of this, Michael ends up at the University of Alberta in Edmonton, Alberta in 1967, in January. And shortly after, that's where he met Kazimierz Dabrowski. One of his Italian friends had told him about Dabrowski, that he had created this theory that psychoneurosis was not an illness. And did Michael know of him? Well, Michael didn't, but they connected. And Michael started working with him on translation of chapters from what was going to be mental growth through positive disintegration. And so Michael helped with the transcript, with the translation. He worked with Dabrowski to get him to elaborate on his ideas. And they produced 2 papers together in French. And these papers ended up being chapters in mental growth. Well, Michael decided to go back to school and get another PhD, this time in counseling psychology. And so after working with Dabrowski for a few years in Edmonton, he went back to school at the University of Wisconsin and got a second PhD. So on this slide, these photos, on the left, on the top, that's Michael in 1962, the trip he took. He was in Port-au-Prince there. On the right, of course, there he is with Dabrowski, and they are at the 1973 American Psychological Association meeting that was in Montreal. And on the bottom, he was just at, this is him in his apartment in the 70s in Madison. So during his second doctoral program, he was working at the Research Laboratory for Superior Students. And that's where he met Nick Colangelo and Lon Zachrin, who were also students with him. And years later, a few years later, they co-edited a book together called New Voices in Counseling the Gifted. And it came out in 1979. And there were 2 chapters in that book that introduced Dabrowski's theory to gifted education. One was from Michael, and the other was from Kay Byrne Colangelo. And so this was the introduction. This was Michael's journey to bringing the theory to gifted education, which is where many of us heard about it. I discovered Dabrowski's theory in 2014, and it was in a chapter from the second edition of the Handbook of Gifted Education, which Nick Colangelo was also co-editor of. And I can't tell you how shocked I was when I read this chapter. You can see on the slide that the title is Emotional Giftedness, the Measure of Intrapersonal Intelligence. Well, this one sentence that I've chosen to share from this chapter is the one that absolutely gobsmacked me. Because when I was a teenager, I absolutely went to the DSM to find answers about myself. I purchased my first DSM. It was DSM-3R, not to date myself, but when I was 17, because I wanted to figure out what was wrong with me. I'm from Connecticut, and I used to volunteer at Yale New Haven Hospital. And where I parked my car, I would have to walk by the Yale Medical School library to get in and out of the hospital. And so I would stop in the bookstore and I would flip through the DSM trying to figure out what was wrong with me, until they would give me a hard time and say, you're not allowed to just flip through that book, you know, kid, like you have to buy it or go to the library. So I bought it. I was like, okay, well, I'll just take this book home and figure out what's wrong with me. But I was working on an autoethnography at the time when I discovered this chapter from Michael. And I was trying to reconcile what had happened to me, what had gone wrong in my life, because I had been identified as a highly gifted kid when I was like 10. But nobody ever talked to me about what it meant to be gifted. And they would try to explain my giftedness in terms of rarity, like, you know, you're one in whatever, and this, you know, this is how special you are. But they never said, this is a real psychological difference that you have compared to the norm. And this is why you're so different. So I saw that I was different from other people, but I took that to mean that there was something wrong with me. Well, imagine that it took decades for me to get this different new message in this chapter from Michael. So yes, I was relieved to see it, but also disturbed by it, because what was I supposed to do with this information? I had spent years of my life accepting myself as mentally ill. I had discarded the gifted label because, well, what use was that to me in adulthood? Like giftedness didn't seem to matter anymore after I graduated from high school. So it took me about a year after that point to actually start deeply investigating the theory, because it was disturbing for me. I wasn't ready to change my thinking. In fact, I mean, when I found that chapter, like I said, I was doing this project where, you know, it was an autoethnography. I was presenting at conferences about being gifted and mentally ill. If I accepted what Michael said and what Dabrowski said, then I was going to have to change my thinking around who I was, and I really wasn't ready to do that. So it was a whole journey. And developing this relationship with Michael, where he's become my friend and mentor, has also been a journey. And that's where this maze imagery comes from. Because I met him via email in 2016. And by that point, right, it's been 2 years since it was actually 2 years to the date between reading that chapter and receiving the first email from Michael. I had submitted a paper to Advanced Development Journal, and he was the one who responded to me with editorial feedback. And I still remember being in my kitchen and, you know, on my phone and going, oh my God, like, did I just get an email from Michael Dabrowski? Like, what? And, you know, my mind was just blown. But I was also like incredibly intimidated by him, and I was afraid. And I remember saying to Nancy Miller, I don't know if I can deal with this guy. Like, he's intimidating, you know, but it was okay. And see, at this point, I had met Linda Silverman. I had met Frank and Nancy. I had been to an OEQ coding workshop. I knew that I was dedicated to this. I was dedicated to giftedness, and I was dedicated to Dabrowski's theory. So right from the start with Michael, I said, so would you be willing to be my mentor? I'm a doctoral student in psychology, and this is my history. I've been writing for 30 years or more, and I was a journal writer. And so I had all of this documentation of my life. And he was like, well, you can ask me questions. I mean, he was not ready to commit and say, yes, I will be your mentor. You know, it wasn't like that. But I could see that he was a real scholar, you know, and all I wanted was to learn with him. I was in an online program. I had never met the committee that was led my dissertation committee. I had no connection with faculty at my school. The idea of having this contact with a scholar like Michael was incredible. So it was quite the journey. I wrote way too much to him for the first year. I mean, I still write too much to Michael. I write to him almost every day, and it's been this way since 2016. If you look, and so I'm a qualitative researcher. From the start, I have been keeping track of our emails and qualitative data analysis software. And so I can tell you exactly the trajectory and the changes over time. And like in June 2016, I wrote fewer than 1,000 words to him. And then in July 2016, I wrote like 11,000 words to him. And then in August, I wrote 20,000 words to him. But the important thing to know is that at this time, while I was trying to connect with Michael and I was so enthusiastic about his work, he was not in a good place with his own work or the theory, because this paper had come out saying that overexcitability was really openness to experience and that it should be discarded in the gifted field because it was no longer relevant. And I was only kind of vaguely aware of what the impact was for him about that paper. But, you know, of course, in retrospect, I realized that during that time, he was upset and he was working on his own paper that was supposed to be a response. And so that was the time when I got to know him. And then another paper came out. And I remember being at the 2016 Congress and Linda talking about that paper at that Congress. And it was a difficult time. Well, another thing that I have to acknowledge that was happening, and it was happening for a long time, way before 2016, is that there's been kind of a history of negativity about Michael and his work. And you can see it online, or you could. It's changed quite dramatically over the past few years, maybe 5 years or less. It's hard to say, but for a long time in the Dabrowski International group on Facebook, and the Dabrowski discussion group, that was like a listserv. There were many, many, many messages, public forum discussions that were relentlessly critical about Michael's work. And so when I came to the theory and I saw that and I was getting to know him, it was this whole process for me of trying to understand what was reality, who was right, what was going on. Was it, and I mean, it was all of these things. Is it really openness to experience? Is this person right about Michael and his work? Like, it was a lot to take in, but I did take it in. And in the next slide, on this one, so your real education begins here. 2017 was a big year. At the beginning of 2017, I submitted a proposal to NAGC because I decided that I needed to share all that I had learned in 2016 about the theory. I had read everything by Michael. I had ordered his 2 dissertations from ProQuest. I had read his book. I had read everything I could get my hands on. I mean, I was writing to him and saying, do you still have this conference paper from 1982? Do you, what about this unpublished manuscript from 1984? And he was like, stop asking me for unpublished manuscripts. They're gone. And so, but that was me. I needed to read everything this man had written. And then I needed to read everything that Dabrowski had written. But I was reluctant to even order the materials from Bill. I was so turned off by what I saw in the Facebook group that I wouldn't even purchase them until December 2016. When I finally broke down and was like, well, I mean, I have to read them. So I bought them. And so I read all of this stuff and it was so fast and it was so constant. And one of the things that I want you to understand is that it completely consumed my life to the point that I remember on Christmas 2016 and on Christmas 2017, my family basically begging me to stop working for an hour and participate in our family environment, because I just would not stop. I mean, I remember on Christmas 16, spending hours that day formatting Michael's 1975 monograph in my QDA software so I could continue coding. It was a relentless process to get here. So yeah, I did this lit review in 2017. And not only did I read all of these materials, but like I just said, I put them in this software program, I coded them, I analyzed them, I traced the constructs over time, I coded all of the data from the multi-levelness project in volume 2. I created data sets of information to share at NAGC. I created data sets of overexcitability data from Dabrowski. I created data sets of the dynamisms by level of development. I shared this huge document that had my inclusion and exclusion criteria as if people were going to read it. I mean, but seriously, I shared all of that at NAGC. Well, this was the project that connected me with Michael. He was like, oh, you're serious about this. I created the first online archive. And so it was at NAGC that he really first started to feel like a mentor to me, because, you know, I was able to call him the night before the presentation to share my anxiety and let him coach me, much like last night when I called and, you know, shared my anxiety. And then after I presented, I was able to call him, and I remember pacing around the hotel and talking to him about how it went in the lobby because I just was so amped up. Oh, so I'm sorry, I forgot to say. So this line on this slide, let me go back to it. Your real education begins here. So he sent me this message that said this, and it was a day of receiving like harsh criticism from him actually about stuff that I had written. So it's funny to me that it's such a positive memory, but it is, because when he wrote back to me, it was like, your real education begins here. I was so happy. Like, that is what I wanted. I wanted a real education from Michael Buchowski. I wanted him to be I wanted to be his student. I knew that in my program, I was not learning how to be a scholar. I was just in an online program, having to have like a do-it-yourself PhD. And to have this opportunity to learn with him was incredible. So on this slide, I just have kind of a sampling of his contributions. This was what I came up with at the end of that lit review, which I presented at the 2018 Congress. So I've already said too much about it. But it reflects the way that I organized Michael's work. And it's just a sample. What you can't get from this slide is the volume of work this man has produced in his career. In that project file, in the qualitative data analysis software, I had 42 documents from Michael. It was articles, it was chapters, it was conference papers, it had his book, Mellow Out. I investigated it all very deeply. And I found that Michael's work on the theory truly was head and shoulders above anything else that I had seen. And it just perplexed me that there would be so much negativity about him and his work when he's obviously so excellent at what he does. Well, for a long time, it was hard because I wanted to get to know him better. Get to know him because I knew his work so intimately. I mean, by 2017, it was easy to say that I knew Michael's work better than anybody. Like, no one knew it like I did. I mean, there's sometimes when I feel like I know his work better than he does, just because it's so much fresher to me and it's right there, you know, accessible to me in my memory. But one thing too, before I change slides, is that I just want to say, when people ask me what they should read about overexcitability, I say, you need to read Michael's book, Mellow Out. Mellow Out is the book to read if you want to understand overexcitability and if you want to understand giftedness. It's one thing to talk about Michael's contribution to the theory of positive disintegration, which is significant, but it's another thing to talk about Michael's contribution to the gifted world and the field of gifted education. And to think that somehow his legacy might be tarnished by these two papers, it just tore me apart inside. Like, it was so hard. And I just didn't know what I could do to help. And I have to say, just as an aside, that Sheila Gallagher, who we'll be hearing from later, is one of the main people who's helped really change the course of that particular problem. And I couldn't be more grateful for her. So these are the trees in front of Michael's place in Madison, Wisconsin. I have visited Michael 11 times at his home in Madison since 2017. I have driven there 8 times from here in Colorado. I've flown 3 times, although not since the pandemic. But it's thanks to these trips that I've really gotten to know who Michael is as a person, beyond his work. And it is so special to go and spend time with Michael. I mean, for one thing, he has this incredible passion for music and stereo equipment. And so when you go visit Michael, you get to sit there with him and listen to music with him, which is amazing. And he makes food for you, which he prepares so carefully with love. And every moment of my trips with him are so special. But it's kind of funny because for the first several visits, it just felt like we had to negotiate becoming friends with each other. Like, it's weird to go visit somebody when you're not friends with them and spend hours with them. And there's only so much you can ask questions about a theory or somebody's work. You know, and yet he would say to me, "What's your next question? I know you haven't exhausted your questions." I'm like, well, and I hadn't exhausted my questions. You know, I would go there with a list, like 2 or 3 pages long with all of my questions. So the trips have been amazing. It's been just a delight to get to know Michael. And actually on the last few trips, I've actually gotten to take things home with me. And I'm going to talk more later in this talk about the archive that I've created, but some of the private collections in the archive are things that Michael has shared with me that are just irreplaceable. And things like the letters between him and Dabrowski, the emails from Anna Marie Roper and him. Like these things are priceless and incredible. And to be given these, you know, it feels like a sacred trust from him. On this slide, I had a hard time trying to figure out how to convey to you how much I write. And so I decided the only thing to do was to show you the raw numbers. So you can tell that in the early part of 2017, I wasn't writing in my journal because I was writing to Michael. Like these were like 20,000 word months to him instead of in my journals. But the fact is, I have carefully documented my time with Michael and our experiences together. And I also write about what I'm reading, and I copy quotes that I think are interesting. I've written about working with Linda and Frank. I've written about the Dabrowski study group. I mean, my writing just captures my experience in the moment. And I think that this was a big part of why I wanted to connect with Michael so much, because I saw the way that he captured diarists like Eddie Hillesum in his work. And I thought, well, I'm a diarist. Like, I've been writing for 30 years. But I think it's been, I mean, it's a weird thing to know that somebody's writing about you, you know? And so again, for us, it's been this constant like negotiating of how to give him enough space and when to come in and when to, you know, back off. And it's been incredible, and I wouldn't change any of it. Well, I want to say that I have other mentors too. And I chose this slide specifically because this isn't like all of our Dabrowski study group. Linda has written about the Dabrowski study group, which really started in Denver in the 80s. But this is a new iteration that began in October 2016. And I got to be a part of it because I had gotten to know you all, you know, and so I was invited to be a part of it. So I chose this photo because I'm sitting there with Bill Tillier's book in my lap. And Frank, Paul, and Bill have also both been mentors to me in their own way. It's, you know, it's hard to capture the nuances of all of these relationships. I'm up here and I'm telling you that there's been a lot of negativity, but the fact is, I'm also friends with Bill. I started getting to know Bill in 2018. Like I said, I've been getting to know Frank since 2015. And these people have been an integral part of my experience in studying the theory and getting to know Michael. working out all of this. And Frank, I mean, Frank and I have spent countless hours at this point going over data, talking about Dabrowski's work, talking about Michael's work, reading other work that helps inform our understanding of these constructs better. And then there's Bill. Bill, we may disagree. We may never be on the same page about Michael, but the fact is, he's been a real support to me. He has been so open with me in sharing his archive with Dabrowski. He's never said no when I've asked him for anything. All of these relationships have been a part of how I have gotten to where I am now in my work. So this slide, when I saw this quote from Rumi, it really made me think of Michael, because it's important to understand that I am Michael's student, but I am not his disciple. I'm not, and it's thanks to him. I easily could have been his disciple, but he would not allow it. I mean, this man is so sensitive to anybody putting him on a pedestal or idealizing him that he just would never allow it. I didn't even show him these final slides because I knew that if I did, he would have been like, no, you can't use like photos of, don't talk about me, just talk about the work. But the fact is, you need to know that he is an incredible person as well as a scholar. He's so humble. I mean, really, I've never met anybody with this kind of humility. It's almost problematic how humble he is because he's just not one to like fight back for himself. And so that was part of why I just felt compelled to take this opportunity to share about him and his work. And I think that it really comes through that, you know, it was a lot of effort and patience on both of our parts to get to this point where, you know, I could be his student. But it's been amazing. Interviews. So I have studied my own life a lot. I'm sure that you can already tell that. I was doing an autoethnography when I came to the theory. Well, one thing that is unexpected for me, but amazing, is that I have been able to shift my focus from studying so much about myself in my past to studying Michael's life. And so in 2019 and 2020, I did 23 interviews with his friends, his goddaughter, colleagues, and it's been wonderful because it's hard to get Michael to talk about himself. He's so humble. Again, like I would never have known he won awards at Illinois and Northwestern for teaching if his students hadn't told me. You know, there just was so much wonderful information to glean from these interviews. I talked with his major advisor, Millard Sussman, you know, the one that was the third shot. That was, you know, in 1962, I think they started together. And Millard talked about what a brilliant researcher Michael was, how meticulous he was, how he helped Millard, who was like a first-year professor, even though Michael was a graduate student. It's just been wonderful to hear what people have had to say. And we don't have time to go into it today, and I'm going to save the interview material for the book, because I am going to write a book about Michael, probably more than one. Betty Maxwell says that for sure there's more than one book to write about Michael. Light your torch from your teacher's fire. I heard Ishwaran say this in a video I was watching about spiritual teachers and students, and I said, yes, this is me. My torch has been lit from Michael's fire. Like, sometimes I wonder when my enthusiasm for the theory or like going to visit Michael is going to wane. And I have to tell you that it hasn't. Like, my enthusiasm for all of this is as strong right now as it has ever been. Another thing that I want to say about Michael is that he lives the theory. This is a man who is living the theory. In one of the interviews I did, one of his colleagues said, you know, Michael is the example of multi-level development. I said, I mean, that's right. At 88 years old, this man is an example of transcending the biological life cycle. And he's also an example of overcoming your psychological type. He's able to write about the theory so beautifully because he lives it. I can tell that I am taking too much time and I'm trying to, I don't want to speed up. He told me last night, don't speed up. Just cut things. So that's what I'm trying to do. So UNASA is a camp for highly gifted children that was founded in 2002. And Patty here was also one of the founders of this camp. And I have had the absolute privilege to get to work at UNASA 3 times with Michael. And he at UNASA has directly influenced the lives of hundreds of children. And I would say that his contribution, like UNASA, is as much of a contribution from Michael as any of his scholarly work. It's just incredible. Yeah, there's so much to say about this. I could do a whole presentation alone on what it's like to work with Michael at UNASA. But he also studied the work of Roberto Assagioli in his psychosynthesis, and we use that with the kids at camp, and it's amazing. And I've used it personally in my life, and it is a real tool for autopsychotherapy and self-education. It's amazing to introduce the kids to that at a young age and see how they take to it. It's so cool. So the fruits of our labor, I wanted to just say that it hasn't just been getting to know Michael and going to visit him. Like, we've also done work together. We published this chapter that came out last year, re-examining overexcitability. It was in the handbook for counselors serving students with gifts and talents. And then this paper that I wrote with Frank, this was like 2 years of our lives that it took to produce this paper. It is extremely detailed. I read it again recently for the first time in a long time, and I was like, wow, this is a lot of details. I hope that people can read it. But in both of these works, we introduce new thinking around the application of overexcitability in the gifted and beyond. We dispelled the notion that there's a real difference between overexcitability and ADHD. We encourage people to take Dabrowski's theory and look at it more from a neurodiversity affirming perspective instead of only for the gifted. We tried to discourage people from using the kind of black and white thinking that makes you think, oh, it's overexcitability or ADHD, or oh, it's openness to experience or overexcitability. These things are very deeply nuanced and complex. So I don't have time to go over these point by point. These are, we all come to the theory with our own ideas about what's important and where we might apply it in the future. And so, of course, my own personal bias is part of this. But for one thing, we need to think about the application of the theory beyond gifted education. That's kind of obvious. But the bottom line is that we need good research. The only way that theories grow and evolve is through research. We can talk about them all day and speculate about what they might mean or how they might be used. But the important thing is that they actually get used in practice and that they get tested. Let's see, I'm trying to think of like, what are the most important things I want to share here? It's hard because, now that I have a clinical practice and I work with clients, I see in my work with them how important it is to have an alternative to the medical model. It's a big deal. People come to me feeling that they're broken, and they initially come to me because that's what they're trying to figure out. Maybe I'm gifted, but there's definitely something wrong with me. I'm either bipolar or I'm this or I'm that. And I can introduce this theory to them and say, well, what if we look at it through the lens of positive disintegration? What if these things about you aren't actually disorders, but potentially keys to your growth? And it actually works. I mean, this is a very important application of the theory that's been kind of lost, because in gifted ed, there has been kind of a focus on overexcitability, and for many years, using it to identify the gifted. And so that to me is perhaps the most important, future application, that it's an alternative to the biomedical model. Another thing that I've found is the theory is still so relevant and important to many people internationally. Dominic Wojnowski is here to talk with us about how people are talking about the theory in Poland, which is so important. And there's a big disconnect between what we're doing here in the United States and how people are talking about the theory in Poland. But it's beyond just the US and Poland too. I can tell you that people reach out to me all the time from all over the world because they want to know more about the theory or they use it in their practice. Last November, I did a presentation at NAGC, and I was so encouraged to see how many people were excited to see my presentation, or like strangers kept coming up to me and saying, "Thank you so much for doing this work." Oh, I was so discouraged by the fact that, people are like ready to just throw it out. And I'm like, yes, I can't tell you how encouraging it was for me personally to hear that kind of thing. Okay, in the interest of time, I have to move on to this next slide and tell you about the Dabrowski Center. So in February, I started this nonprofit organization called the Dabrowski Center. And it's meant to be a home for the theory, because we don't have one home for the theory. Just like we don't, we haven't had a place where we could have this connection with giftedness either, without having to kind of apologize for it. But the thing is, one thing that I guess I should say that has become extremely obvious to me is that it's up to us as a community, our Dabrowski community, but also within the gifted community, to stand up and say, this is our experience, this is our reality, and we don't have to apologize for it or defend ourselves to people who don't get it. Because unfortunately, people who aren't gifted and people who don't experience overexcitability, people who have never experienced dynamisms, can't relate to what it's like. And so they are invalidating our experiences all the time on social media, at conferences, in their papers. Well, we need to do something about that. Like, we need to reclaim this narrative. We can't let that go away. I don't see young scholars in the field of gifted education being enthusiastic about the theory because they've seen in the literature that it's problematic for whatever reason. But we can turn that around, and we have to. And this is one of the key things that made me start the Dabrowski Center, is I thought, well, somebody has to do this. So the center's mission is to actively promote mental health through the application, exploration, research, and dissemination of the theory. It's a lot. And on this slide, this is a mixture of things that I'm doing now and things that I hope to do. And I can tell you that I certainly can't do all of these things on my own. This is not just my center. This is meant to be a center grounded in this community for all of us. I didn't get as much work done on the website as I had hoped to by this Congress, and I've realized that I need to hire somebody to help me, because I can't like have a private practice and a family and write and do everything I do and do that. So I appreciate your patience while I work that out. Let's see, I might want to go to the next slide. No, I'll stay with this one for a minute. So one of my goals is to build and maintain a database of providers who use the theory in their practice. It's kind of surprising to me that we don't already have that. To be fair, Seng has tried, Hoagie's has tried, but it's not enough. And not only are these providers people who know giftedness, but I want to be able to say, this is someone who knows giftedness. This is someone who knows Dabrowski's theory. This is someone who is a neurodiversity affirming clinician. These are important things, and that alone could take me time to develop, but this is one of the goals. Another project that is something I want to accomplish within the first 3 years is to develop best practices for working with the theory for clinicians and educators. Those would be two separate things. We need best practices for treating mental health in the gifted. This does not exist. There is not one website or one place where a clinician can look when they have a gifted client to find help. We need this. This is a desperate need. When clinicians who don't get taught about giftedness, yes, thank you in the back. When clinicians don't know about giftedness, they cause harm for their gifted clients and cause trauma. I can tell you this personally. I've been traumatized many times by therapists who were well-intentioned, but just didn't understand. We can't expect them to understand. We have to train them. And so that's why with the Dabrowski Center, I hope to provide content. I hope to be able to have an interview with someone like Patty and say, what do you do in this circumstance? How do you work with people? And to get this out there, because we can't just expect it to magically happen. It's a similar problem to educating educators. I mean, only a fraction of them ever get taught anything about giftedness. Well, guess what? Clinicians don't get taught anything about giftedness. It's even worse. So for this next slide, I apologize in advance because it's going to be hard for you to read here in person. But I just wanted to give an overview of some of the areas that I'm hoping to focus on. The things with asterisks are future projects, and other things are things that I'm already doing. And I'm actually going to talk a little bit more about the archive, groups, and the podcast on separate slides. So I've already been doing consulting work for a few years now. It is shocking how many people reach out to me from across the world at this point, wanting to know more about the theory, wanting documents, wanting me to answer their questions. They want to apply it in their practice. I have been doing this work for free. I do not charge people to ask me questions about the theory, but I'm going to have to stop doing that because I mean, there are only so many hours in the day, and you've already heard how my family has to beg me to take a break on Christmas. Like, something has to give or I'm going to burn myself out. What else? I can't even see the slide because it's so small on my computer. And I have speaking engagements here. So I am presenting at 6 conferences this year because I have made it my mission to go out and spread the word about Dabrowski, kind of like Linda did in the 80s and the 90s, because we cannot let people forget about the importance of this theory for the gifted. And we have to get it out beyond the gifted, which, you know, is another whole hurdle for me. I would like to present at APA about the theory, but again, like, I'm just one person. It's going to be important with the center to train people, to educate them about the theory and to bring them into the fold so that, you know, other people are out there doing this work too. Let's see. So Tina Harlow is a Dabrowski Center director, and we have been talking for the past couple of years about creating content for clinicians and creating content for parents. There is so much more to do. And then just the only other thing I wanted to mention on this slide is accessibility is something that we're missing. And I mean that in the sense of many people tell me, well, I would love to read Michael's book, Mellow Out, but I'm dyslexic and I'm never going to sit down and read that book. If there was an audio version, I would listen to it. We need to make an audio version of Michael's book. We need to make audio versions of the Dabrowski materials. And we need to provide transcripts of the podcasts that I do. We need to provide transcripts of the videos of all of the sessions from this conference. Well, all of these things take money and time and effort. Then there's translation work. That's another thing. So I've been working with Michael on translation because I've been learning Polish since 2017. And so we've worked a lot on that, but there's much more translation work to do beyond what he can ever do as one man. So that's, you know, more on that too. So the archive, I hear myself speeding up, sorry. But the archive is so much more than written materials. There is a significant digital archive with interviews, audio recordings of Michael doing psychosynthesis exercises, presentations, so much. Books. I mean, I have a storage unit with all of these boxes of books that Ellen Fiedler donated, Michelle's friend Rena Finder donated, Frank has donated his books. There are a lot of books, there are a lot of materials, and I am only at the beginning of being able to sort them and make them available to the public. I have two groups that we've been running from the Dabrowski Center. One is the Positive Disintegration Study Group. This has been around since May 2020 at this point. We meet monthly on Zoom, and there's a private Facebook group. Members have been paying $10 a month, but it's optional. It's really just a donation, you know, for my time and effort. I provide a reading every month and, you know, make it all happen. The other group is called the HGPG group, and it is for adults who are extreme outliers. It's for people who are highly and profoundly gifted. I have carefully vetted both of these groups. Like I said, there's a private Facebook group for the study group and for the HGPG group. Tracy Winter has been co-facilitating that group with me, and thankfully, because otherwise we wouldn't have been able to meet last month because of UNASA. But we're doing it pro bono. We have not been charging people to be in this group because it is very important to me that the Dabrowski Center is accessible to everyone and that money is not a problem. I don't ever want someone to say, oh, I wanted to be in your group, but I can't afford it. That can never happen. It's very important to me that all of this is accessible. Just briefly on this slide, other Facebook groups where I'm an admin. I'm an admin with Bill and Amanda Harper in Dabrowski International. Parents of Gifted and Twice Exceptional Kids. I started in December 2018 with Kate Arms and Jen Merrill, and we had to bring in Stephanie Smart and Jen Curry as admins. We just hit 10,000 members last week in this group. Thank you. It's a wonderful resource. And then therapists and coaches supporting gifted and Chewy clients. This is quite a new group with Katie Higgins Lee. It was actually her idea, and I just joined to help her. But this is a great group, and this is all therapists. There's more than 100 right now who work with gifted and twice exceptional clients in some capacity. And so this is where we're going to start developing the database of clinicians. Then there is the podcast, which I'm sure many of you are already familiar with, that I do with Emma Nicholas. Emma Nicholson, I can't say enough good about Emma. This is the best experience I've ever had with working with another person as an adult. She is incredible. And if the Dabrowski Center ever gets a benefactor, one of the first things I'm going to do is hire Emma and steal her away from the banking industry so she can work with the theory full time. But the podcast, we've just been so blown away by the feedback we've gotten from people. And I actually had a slide with just a few comments we've had. We had no idea that so many people would listen, so many people would reach out. It has been wonderful. So I just wanted to point out that Frank talked with us in episode 5 about researching overexcitability. Melissa Bernstein talked with us in episode 15 about creativity and her journey to authenticity. And if you haven't read Melissa's book, Lifelines, you have to, because when I opened up your book and saw how Michael's work and Dabrowski's had changed your life, I was like, every time something like that happens, it is like a divine intervention or something. And then Sheila Gallagher talked with us in episode 16 about overexcitability and openness to experience. And that's the most recent one, actually. We have several still ready to release that have to be edited. The next one is going to be with Elizabeth Mika, which is going to be great. Okay, so building community. I'm getting to the end here. There's only 5 minutes left. First of all, I want to express my deep gratitude for all of you who created the Congress as we now know it. you know, the modern incarnation of the Dabrowski Congress, and kept it going for all of these years. It has changed my life to find and be accepted in the gifted and Dabrowski communities and to receive such a warm welcome. I mean, I remember the 2016 Congress and going for the first time, and it was wonderful. But at the end, it was like a game of hot potato, where it was like, where's it going to be next? And everybody was like, not me. And, you know, that happened again in 2018. And it was like, well, where's the next Congress going to be? I don't know. And well, we can't have that. We need to have continuity and stability for this incredible event that we have, because to me, this is like the most special conference that I attend. It's only every other year. And this, I remember Linda telling me, if you know, saying is great, but the Dabrowski Congress is where you're going to find your people. And it was true. And so I would like to propose, I would like to set the intention actually, that the Dabrowski Center is going to end the game of hot potato, and that even though I don't know about event planning and it's going to take help from a committee of people who are good at it, I would like to be the one to deal with this and not have it be perceived as a problem, and to figure it out from now on with your blessing. Well, thank you. So now I'm wrapping up, and I just want to say that it has been an honor and a privilege to talk with you today about Michael and his work and getting to know him and starting the center and all of my dreams and hopes and my vision for what could be with the theory. Well, now that I have a nonprofit, it's like I'm obligated now to say that I am doing this work for donations. I do have a clinical practice, but I don't even turn away clients who can't pay me my full fee. So rest assured that I am not supporting this Dabrowski Center with the money I'm making as a clinician. So I just want to say, I mean, if you value this work, if you value what I do, I would appreciate donations. You know, I put the PayPal up here. You can always email me. It is much appreciated. But no matter what, I'm going to keep doing it. So, you know, I will figure it out regardless, I guess is what I'm saying. But thank you for being here. Thanks to everybody who's watching the live stream. And it is my privilege to say that next up is my other mentor, Frank Falk, and I cannot wait to hear what he has to say, because he's been a little bit secretive about what his session's going to be like. So thank you.
Okay, we're gonna flip the tech and Frank will get started in like a minute and a half.
I got such a kick out of the hot potato in St. Charles when Michelle put a conference together. I went to the bathroom and I came back.